school, Dr. James Dembski. Dr. Dembski received his PhD from University of New Hampshire, began teaching here in 1973. This is now his 40th year and 13th year as headmaster after holding every important academic position in the school. And I'm delighted to now present you with Dr. James Dembski.
Thanks, James. I think an introduction is meant to create interest in the upcoming speaker and an appetite for his or her talk, and I think that Dr. Miller has set that up quite nicely for us. I'm going to spare you some of the details that I was going to mention, but it is a great pleasure to welcome one of our own, Dr. Bill Dembski, class of 1978, here this morning to speak on the topic of an informative theoretic proof of God's existence. Bill was a student at Portsmouth Abbey. Actually, Bill left Portsmouth Abbey after his junior year to attend the University of Chicago. And I actually asked Bill this morning as I was going through things, Bill, did you ever actually get a diploma from Portsmouth Abbey? And he smiled and he said he did in 1988. And there was more of a story to that than we had time to hear about. So, Bill, you owe me the rest of that story, as a matter of fact. And Bill holds several degrees, as a matter of fact, several master's degrees and 2 PhDs. One in mathematics, of which I am particularly proud, and the other in philosophy. Both my wife, Deb, and I had the privilege and pleasure of teaching Bill mathematics back during his time here at Portsmouth from 1974 to 1977. During that time, we had a custom, which we don't do anymore, where we ranked students in every single thing they did academically, everything. And I was going through quite an old dusty area under our auditorium, and I was able to pull out some of Bill's old teacher reports. And on those reports, when everything was good and every number was 1, so not to be surprised at all. My personal experience teaching Bill was in an honors geometry class that I taught, and teaching geometry to bright young high school students is arguably the best mathematics teaching experience that one could ever have. I've taught mathematics at university and here at Portsmouth Abbey, and teaching bright kids like Bill, geometry is really a treat. Geometry provides a logical and intuitive system in which to operate, and the students at that level, the young students, are totally uninhibited in their willingness to speak up and to take intellectual chances. And Bill was one of those for sure. I remember on a final exam, and I don't know why I remember this so vividly, but I do. It was a very good class, the class we had, as you recall, Bill. I remember it very well. We had a lot of bright students. We had a lot of personalities in the class. And I decided in a final exam that I would just have a problem that no one would be able to answer. And so I put that problem on there, and Bill posed this proof, and we did things, 2-column proofs in those days. And Bill had 40-some steps in this proof, and I was determined that this proof was wrong. Okay, and I read it over and over again, spent a disproportionate amount of time trying to find a flaw in his argument, but I could not. And I didn't save it, Bill, or I'd still be looking at it, I'm sure, and I'm sure he's right, as a matter of fact. My only regret regarding Bill's mathematical career at Portsmouth was that I did not have the opportunity to teach him calculus. I looked him up on Wikipedia, and it said that Bill taught himself calculus that summer between Portsmouth and the University of Chicago, and I did miss that opportunity that I didn't have. Anyhow, Bill, it's my pleasure and honor to be introducing you this morning and to be welcoming you back to Portsmouth. Let's give Bill.
Well, it's good to be back at the Abbey after all these years. The last time was 1996, when I was just finishing my seminary studies at Princeton. Since then, my 20th, 25th, and 30th reunions have taken place. I wanted to be at all of them, but work and family obligations prevented that. I've spoken here once before, in 1988, where I got my high school diploma 10 years after the fact, as part of the Domluc Child's lecture series. It was a happy encounter. My topic was Truth in an Age of Uncertainty and Relativism. I was, at the time, a postdoctoral fellow in mathematics at MIT, and named on the Abbey's mailing list, so when I received any publications from the school, I eagerly scanned them for photos of people that I still remember. Although the years have taken their toll.
Excuse me, Mr. Dembski, we can't really hear you very well in the back.
All right. Although the years have taken their toll, I still recognize faces of those who impacted me so significantly here. Many of you, I want to thank all of you for this opportunity to be back here. Now, I've titled my talk provocatively, An Information-Theoretic Proof of God's Existence. The most troubling word in this title for contemporary thinkers is proof. Proof these days typically denotes a decisive confirmation that brooks no rational dissent. Am I really suggesting that God's existence can be proved with 100% certainty, and that the tools of mathematics and information theory in particular are up for the task? Let me assure you that this is not my intention. So set your minds at ease. My aim is much more modest. The word proof derives etymologically from the Latin probare, which has two primary but related meanings: to test. The exception proves the rule, a man of proven character, and to prove or esteem as good, provided that a thing has passed the test. So the two are related. It's in this latter sense, then, that I want to describe how information theory proves or approves the existence of God. We'll start with a little historical backdrop. The proof I will offer is a species of design argument. Since the design argument is widely thought to have been discredited by advances in philosophy and science, let me start by placing my project in a historical context and presenting some of the reasons for thinking that reports of its demise are premature. The design argument begins with features of the natural world that exhibit evidence of purpose, and from there attempts to establish the existence and attributes of an intelligent cause responsible for those features. And I think this is really the nub of the difference between myself and Ken Miller: evidence of purpose. It's one thing to see it as a matter of faith. It's another thing to say, are there clear signs of intelligence in the natural world? Just what features signal an intelligent cause, what the nature of that intelligent cause is, for example, personal agent or teleological process, and how convincingly those features establish the existence of an intelligent cause remain subjects for debate, and account for the variety of design arguments over the centuries. Perhaps the best known design argument is William Paley's. According to Paley, if we find a watch in a field, the watch's adaptation of parts to telling time ensures that it is the product of an intelligence. So too, according to Paley, the marvelous adaptation of means to ends in organisms, such as the human eye, ensure that organisms are the product of intelligence. Paley published his design argument in an 1802 book titled Natural Theology, subtitled Evidences of the Existence and Attributes of the Deity Collected from the Appearances of Nature. You've got to love these old titles, they say it all. Paley's project was to examine features of the natural world, appearances of nature, and from there draw conclusions about the existence and attributes of the designing intelligence responsible for those features, whom for Paley was the God of Christianity. Paley was overly optimistic about how much theological mileage could be obtained from the design argument. As Immanuel Kant noted in his critique of pure reason, Kant is usually characterized as somebody who dismissed the design argument. If you read his first critique and even some of his later critiques, he's not totally against it. He just sees it as being quite limited. So what he saw was that the most the design argument can establish is an architect, quote, an architect of the world who is constrained by the adaptability of the material in which he works, not a creator of the world to whose idea everything is subject, close quote. Far from rejecting the design argument, Kant objected to overextending it. For Kant, the design argument legitimately establishes an architect, that is, an intelligent cause whose contrivances are constrained by the materials that make up the world. But it can never establish a creator who originates the very materials which the architect has to fashion. We need here to draw a clear distinction between creation and design. And we need to do this doubly because it's very convenient to identify intelligent design with creationism, because then it's immediately a religious idea, and then it can be dismissed on First Amendment grounds. Creation is always about the source of being of the world. Design is about arrangements of pre-existing materials that point to an intelligence. Creation and design are therefore quite different. One can have creation without design and design without creation. For instance, one can have a doctrine of creation in which God creates the world in such a way that nothing about the world points to design. You can have a creation that's just one big schmoo. There's nothing there. Total formlessness. On the other hand, creates a world in which nothing points to design. Richard Dawkins has a book titled The Blind Watchmaker, subtitled Why the Evidence of Evolution Reveals a Universe Without Design. Suppose Dawkins is right about the universe revealing no evidence of design. It would not logically follow that it was not created. it is logically possible that God created a world that provides no evidence of his handiwork. On the other hand, it is logically possible that the world is chock full of signs of intelligence but was not created. This was the ancient Stoic view, in which the world was eternal and uncreated, and yet a rational principle pervaded the world and produced in it marks of intelligence. Read Cicero on that. There's a joke that clarifies the difference between design and creation. Scientists come to God and say, we can do everything you can do. That's interesting. Like what? Am I fading again?
Yeah.
Let's put this as close as possible here. Because I am projecting a little bit. Mic check. 1, 2, 3. Nope. Still not. Okay, I'll try to project. So,
Yeah.
Is the mic on?
I was going to say.
it's close. All right. Where am I? So these scientists come to God, we can do everything you can do. Like what? Like creating human beings, say the scientists. Show me, says God. Scientists say, well, we start with some dust and then God breaks in. Wait a second, get your own dust. That's where the doctrine of creation always gets it. It's the source of being. So just as a carpenter must take pre-existing wood to form a piece of furniture, so these scientists have to take pre-existing dust to form a human being. But where did that dust, the raw materials, come from making a human being? From stars? Well, where did the stars come from? From the Big Bang? Where did the Big Bang come from? From the quantum vacuum fluctuation? Where did that quantum vacuum fluctuation come from? Right? It's really remarkable when you see Richard Dawkins talking about a nothing that's really characterized by certain laws of quantum gravity, which then isn't real nothing. Because if it's a real nothing, there are no predicates that apply to nothing. But this nothing that the physicists talk about seems to be really something. At any rate, at some point, the questions must come to an end. Creation asks for an ultimate resting place of explanation, the source of being of the world. Design, by contrast, inquires not into the ultimate source of matter and energy, but into the cause of their present arrangements, particularly those entities, large and small, that exhibit signs of intelligence. Even Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas, admitted the need for modesty in design reasoning. In his Summa against the Gentiles, Aquinas wrote, by his, quote, by his natural reason, man is able to arrive at some knowledge of God. Foreseeing that natural things run their course according to a fixed order, and since there cannot be an order without a cause of order, men, for the most part, perceive that there is one who orders the things that we see. But who or of what kind this cause of order may be, or whether there be but one, cannot be gathered from this general consideration, close quote. Aquinas here is not doing first philosophy or metaphysics. I think that's an important point to realize. He was simply noting that our natural reason readily infers some sort of orderer or designer behind nature. Aquinas calls this designer God, but he was clearly speaking of this designer very loosely. The nature and even plurality of the designer, whether it's one or many, could not for Aquinas be settled simply by studying nature. Design arguments can tell us whether certain patterns exhibited in nature reliably point us to a designing intelligence, but there's no inferential chain that leads from such a finite design-producing patterns in nature to the infinite personal transcendent creator God of Christianity. Nevertheless, a design argument can clear the way for materialistic stumbling blocks to belief in God. For example, it can refute the claim that science has shown that all patterns in nature can be explained without recourse to intelligence. Now, that's an important point, materialism versus material. I'm a great believer in the material. The world is material, and I think the potentialities of matter are tremendous. But materialism is an ideology. It's saying that matter is all there is. Okay? And so I think it's an important point to clarity. It's also not going on shopping streets because you like matter and material things and money. I mean, it's a philosophical ideology, which is very dominant in the scientific world, by the way. I mean, if you look at, especially the cream of the crop of scientists, National Academy of Sciences, it's overwhelmingly atheistic and materialistic. And it raises some questions why that should be. I want next to cash out the design argument with this concept of information. Okay, anyway, time is wasted. To develop this species of design argument, let's start by elucidating the distinction between information and matter. Imagine that you are an interior decorator. Bill Gates hires you to decorate his mansion. You find it on the internet, it's 60,000 square feet. You decide to put a big marble bust of the composer Ludwig van Beethoven in the music room. You therefore contract with Laszlo, a promising, if eccentric, young sculptor, to make the bust and deliver it to the mansion. The next day, he drops by the mansion and tells you he's finished. Naturally, you're skeptical, but he rolls an imposing crate into the music room and with some fanfare removes the sculpture. You find yourself staring at a big marble cube. Shocked, you ask the sculptor, where's the bust of Beethoven? The bust is there, all right, he says, handing you the bill. You just have to scoot aside the excess marble. When you protest, he grows red-faced and yells, I defy you to find a single solitary molecule of Beethoven's bust that isn't in that block of marble. Now pay what you owe me. The quarrel escalates, each of you growing increasingly red-faced until who should walk into the room but Bill Gates himself. He calms the two of you and gets first your side of the story and then the sculptor's. He says, tell you what, I'm so impressed with your sculpture, Laszlo, that instead of paying you what we agreed, I'll trade you an advanced copy of the next generation of Microsoft Windows for it. Here Gates produces an unmarked compact disc. This is it, and you're free to sell it, the operating system on the black market, to whomever you wish, as often as you wish. Are you crazy, you shout, forgetting yourself? That's worth billions. Deal, Laszlo shouts, snatches the disc from Gates' hand and rushes to a nearby computer. After some pointing and clicking, the sculptor turns on Mr. Gates. The disc is blank. Give me the operating system. Oh, but friend, Gates replies, resting an avuncular hand on the sculptor's shoulder. I defy you to find a single solitary molecule of the operating system that isn't on that disk. You just have to scoot aside and assist white on it, and there it is. Now, this story illustrates a distinction between information and matter. Parting just a little bit from the text. They're not the same thing. And what you have is with information, there's a multi-realizability. When you type at your keyboard an email message, let's say, and you go into some sort of Unicode, you code it out that way. Then it's going to go over the internet down transmission lines using some error correction, all sorts of transfer protocols. It's going to go through many transformations. It's the same information in some sense, but many different physical realizations of it. And so this information rides, it's not something that's reducible to matter. Okay? And this is a fundamental difference that Ken and I would have on these questions. And this is an old notion. I mean, it's not just that you have to look to crazy, intelligent design people to take this. I mean, Norbert Wiener back in the 1940s when he developed the notion of cybernetics, he said that materialism that cannot come to terms with information cannot survive. Okay? That there's something new and fundamental going on there. Continue. This story then, Bill Gates and this crazy sculptor, illustrates the difference between information and matter. Matter is raw stuff that can take any number of shapes. Information is what gives shape to matter, fixing one shape to the exclusion of others. Both the words matter and information derive from Latin. Matter, from Latin materia, initially referred to raw timber used in building houses. Later came to mean any raw stuff and material with the potential to assume different shapes, forms, and arrangements. Information from the Latin informare literally means to give form or shape to something. Unlike passive or inert matter, which needs to be acted upon, information is active. Information acts on matter to give it its form, shape, arrangement, or structure. Note that I'm using these terms loosely and interchangeably. Aristotle will distinguish form in the sense of a substantial form or essence from mere shape or arrangement. It's enough for my purposes here, however, that shape or arrangement can be correlated with form in Aristotle's sense. Thus, for marble to express form, sense of Aristotle, of Beethoven's likeness, it must be shaped or arranged in very particular ways. As an interior decorator, you are paying the sculptor to inform the slab of marble, to take an unformed slab of marble and give it shape or form of the composer Ludwig van Beethoven. For the sculptor to tell you that the cube of marble contains the promised bust of Beethoven, you just have to remove the excess marble, is therefore totally unacceptable. That's what you were paying the sculptor to do. Yes, the marble of the cube has the potential to become a bust of Beethoven, but it also has the potential to take on countless other shapes. It was the sculptor's job to give the marble the shape he requested. The relationship between matter, which has the potential to assume any possible shapes and information with its restriction of possibilities to a narrow range of shapes, is fundamental to our understanding of the world. Certainly this relation holds for all human artifacts. This is true not just for human artifacts composed of physical stuff, like marble busts of Beethoven, but also for human artifacts composed of more abstract stuff, like poetry and mathematics. Indeed, the raw material for many human inventions consists not of physical stuff, but of abstract stuff like alphabetic characters, musical notes, and numbers. For instance, the raw material for a Shakespearean sonnet consists of the 26 letters of the alphabet. Just as the bust of Beethoven is only potential in a slab of marble, so a Shakespearean sonnet is only potential in those 26 letters. It takes a sculptor to actualize the bust of Beethoven, and it takes a Shakespeare to arrange those 26 letters appropriately to the sonnet. Now, the relation between matter and information that we are describing here is old and was understood by the Greeks, ancient Greeks, especially the Stoics. What's more, nothing said so far about the relationship between matter and information is particularly controversial. The world consists of a lot of raw stuff, material, waiting to be suitably arranged. There's matter, passive and inert stuff waiting to be arranged, and there's information, the active principle doing the arranging. This is a perfectly straightforward and useful way of carving up experience and making sense of the world. Much of our knowledge of the world depends on understanding this relationship between matter and information. Nonetheless, the relation between those two becomes controversial once we add another dimension to it. And this really gets closer to our topic of discussion here. And that is the other dimension is nature and design. So far, the examples of information we've considered have focused on the activity of a designing intelligence, a sculptor or writer in forming or giving shape to certain raw materials, a slab of marble or letters of the alphabet. But designing intelligences are not the only causal powers capable of structuring matter and thereby conferring information. Nature, too, is capable of structuring matter and conferring information. Consider the difference between raw pieces of wood and an acorn. Raw pieces of wood do not have the power to assemble themselves into a ship. Raw pieces of wood to form a ship require a designer to draw up a blueprint and then take the pieces of wood and arrange them into the form of a ship. But where is the designer that causes an acorn to develop itself into a full-grown oak tree? There isn't any. The acorn has within itself the power to transform itself into an oak tree. Nature and design therefore represent two different ways of producing information. Nature produces information as it were internally. The acorn assumes the shape it does through powers internal to it. It has, as it were, a seed programmed to produce an oak tree. On the other hand, a ship assumes the shape it does through powers external to it. The designing intelligence imposes suitable structure on pieces of wood. I'm going to skip a little bit, but just say this. Aristotle understood this distinction. He said that if pieces of wood had the power to arrange themselves into a ship, then ships would come about by nature. But as it is, they don't. So they come about by design, which in the Greek is techne, Latin ars, artis, and then design. So these are all. So this idea of design is that the form is imposed from outside. Nature produces the design internally. Okay. So the central question that an information-theoretic design argument needs to resolve can therefore be stated as follows. Is nature complete in the sense of possessing all the resources needed to bring about the information-rich structures we see in nature? Or does nature also require some contribution of design to bring about those structures? Now, it's a perfectly reasonable question. I mean, in a sense, we think of it in terms of evolution. Evolution is a theory of process that tells us we can get from point A to point B. Evolutionists like Ken Miller will say that the main driving force to get from point A to point B is natural selection. And then it's a reasonable question to ask, can natural selection do that heavy lifting? Can it move it from point A to point B? We ask these sorts of questions in all sorts of contexts. If you're at the bottom of Mount Everest and need to get to the top, do you have the resources to do it? If you have a pogo stick, that's not going to be enough. So you'll need something more. And so it's a legitimate question. Does nature have what it takes? Just given what nature is as we understand it in material terms. What is that? I mean, if you look, for instance, at Richard Feynman's lectures on physics. He said if there's one sentence that we could leave to posterity, all the science books burned down, we just could leave one sentence so they could reconstruct all of science, what would it be? And it's basically that all material things are composed of little particles that move each other by forces of repulsion and attraction. So if we can have that, I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically the sentence, then we could reconstruct all of science. But if that's all there is to nature, the material world, nuts and bolts level, is that enough to drive the whole evolutionary process? When at higher levels, you're going to have things like natural selection kicking in. Is that enough? I mean, it's a legitimate question. Is it adequate? Notice something, and I'll speak to this a little bit more. I'm not here challenging evolution, and I was surprised actually that Ken Miller would say that intelligent design people are saying that evolution doesn't happen. Mike Behe, who's the best known intelligent design theorist, holds the common ancestry. So probably 90% of Ken Miller's talk, he would have said, check, no problem with that. I think it's the question is the mechanism of evolutionary change, and is it a purely material process, or are there signs of intelligence that we can clearly discern in that process? So anyway, so this is, so let's turn then to the next question, which is, there's information and there's information. And so I want to focus on a particular type of information then, which is required for an information-theoretic design argument of the sort that I'm going to make, which I call complex specified information. Now, again, Ken and I, we have sparred in debates over the years, and I seem to get the sense that he's in attack mode, saying that intelligent design has collapsed. Now, this notion of complex specified information, I published it first in a book with Cambridge University Press in 1998 titled The Design Inference. It was a well-received book at the time because I didn't at the time make the connection with evolutionary biology. Once I did, that's when my academic career went down the toilet. But until then, people were saying all sorts of glowing things about the book, and not since David Hume as the design, and not since Darwin have we seen these sorts of arguments laid out, and so I was saying that my work on randomness is the most sophisticated out there. So the thing is, I just want to, Aristotle, there were three appeals of rhetoric, right? There's the logos, the logic. You're getting just a tremendous argument from me here, but then there's the platform of the speaker, right? The ethos, and then the pathos, the fear. Ken Miller plays on the fear. If these crazy intelligent design people get into science, it's the dark ages that are coming back. But the ethos, my platform in all of this, it's I've done a lot of heavy lifting and thinking about these questions, and they have appeared in the peer-reviewed literature. I'm publishing in these areas of information theory in IEEE journals, in Journal of Advanced Computational Intelligence, engineering group that I work with at Baylor. So it's not that this stuff, and this is ongoing research. So to say that intelligent design has collapsed, I would say in terms of the courts, legal systems, yeah, we didn't fare well there in Dover. But I think there are also a number of misrepresentations. I'm sorry, I'm kind of veering off, but I think there are a few clarifications to be made. Nobody at the Discovery Institute in the design movement wanted this case to go to trial. We thought it was bad pedagogy. This Kitzmiller v. Dover case. It was so nobody wanted this. In terms of, by the way, me withdrawing from this case, I was fired. Okay, and I've said this on my blog. Ken Miller seems to go scrupulously through my blog. I've stated it. I was fired. I did not withdraw. I was looking forward to being deposed in this case. And with my vice strategy, that was said ironically because so many opponents of intelligent design were onto this wedge strategy, which they disliked. And so I thought, well, let's make a vice strategy to poke a little fun at this. But anyway, in terms of being deposed, I'm willing, if you ever want to get your ACLU people together, Ken, and have them depose me at their leisure, I'm willing to do it. Okay? I would even propose, if you'd like, you take your three best men or women, I'll take my three best men or women, take a lawyer from the ACLU, I'll take a lawyer from a public interest firm that I trust, not a Thomas More law center that's trying to get the case to the Supreme Court, and we'll go at it on the internet. You can do it publicly, and you can do it satisfied that we've said everything that needs to be said. By the way, I don't think that the Thomas More, I was at the deposition of Barbara Forrest. They had about 1.5, 2 full-time people on that case. The ACLU, I think, had about 12. They did not seem to be very competent. I was writing notes to the attorneys, so I was not impressed with them. So I don't think you got the sort of deposition that I would like to see for the vice strategy. So just for the record. Okay, so let me. After that digression, back to the argument. I want, therefore, next to describe this form of information, complex specified information. To understand this concept, we need briefly to review contemporary information theory as employed by mathematicians. Ordinarily, when we think of information, we think of meaningful statements that we communicate to each other. The vehicle of communication here is language, and the information is the meaning communicated by some utterance or linguistic expression. The picture of information diverges sharply from the picture of information associated with the mathematical theory of information. The ordinary picture of information focuses on meaning and treats the linguistic vehicle by which that meaning is transmitted as secondary. The mathematical picture of information, by contrast, focuses exclusively on the vehicle and ignores the meaning entirely. Consider a spy who needs to determine the intentions of an enemy, whether the enemy intends to go to war or preserve peace. The spy agrees with headquarters about what signal will indicate war and what signal will indicate peace. Let's imagine that the spy will send headquarters a radio transmission, and that each transmission takes the form of a bit string that is sequence of zeros and ones. The spy and headquarters might agree that 0 means war and 1 means peace. But because of noise along the communication channel, which might flip the 0 to a 1 and vice versa, it might be good to have some redundancy in the transmission. Thus, the spy and headquarters might agree that 000 represents war and 111 peace, and that anything else will be regarded as a garbled transmission. Or perhaps they will agree to let 0 represent a dot and 1 a dash, and let the spy communicate via Morse code in plain English whether the enemy plans to go to war or keep peace. This example illustrates how information in the sense of meaning can remain constant, whereas the vehicle for representing and transmitting it can vary. It's what I called multiple realizability of information earlier. In ordinary life, we are concerned with meaning. If we are headquarters, we want to know whether we're going to war or staying with peace. Yet, from the vantage of the mathematical theory of information, the only thing that's important here is the mathematical properties of the linguistic expressions we are using to represent the meaning. If we represent war with 000 as opposed to 0, we require 3 times as many bits to represent war. And so, from the vantage of the mathematical theory, we are utilizing 3 times as much information. Information content of 000 is 3 bits, whereas that of 1 single 0 is 1 bit. Now, Claude Shannon co-invented the mathematical theory of information shortly after World War II. The inspiration for his theory derived from his work in cryptography. In cryptography, meaningful messages get encrypted to prevent an enemy from reading one's mail. The important thing in cryptography is to have a secure encryption-decryption scheme, to be able to code messages efficiently as character strings from some alphabet, and then to be able to move those strings across the communication channel efficiently. The actual meaning of a character string therefore takes second seat in the mathematical theory of information. Think of the mathematical theory of information as an internet service provider. The internet service provider is not concerned with the meaning of your email messages, we hope not, or what product you're trying to sell on your website. What they're concerned about is that the character strings you use to convey the meaning in your emails or on your website is faithfully stored and transmitted. That's what the mathematical theory of information is all about. Specifically, it's about quantifying information in such character strings, characterizing the statistical properties of such strings when they're sent across noisy communication channels, preserving the strings despite the presence of noise and error-correcting codes, compressing the strings to improve efficiency, and transforming the strings into other strings to maintain their security. Although Shannon's theory started out as a syntactic theory concerned with the character strings based on an alphabet, it quickly became a statistical theory. Characters from an alphabet will often have different probabilities of occurrence. For instance, the letters of an ordinary alphabet, English alphabet, occur with varying frequencies. The letter E occurring roughly 13% of the time, the letter Q appearing before the letter U with probability 1, except if you're using words from the Middle East. So there are all these statistical properties that we see with the English language. These probabilities in turn determine how much information any given string can convey. In general, the quantity of information contained in a character string corresponds to the improbability of the character string. Thus, the more improbable the string, the more information it contains. To see why this should be the case, consider the claim, "It's raining outside." This claim will be more informative, now in a loose semantic sense, depending on how improbable it is. If it refers to weather in the Sahara Desert during the summer, when the chance of rain is very low, then this claim will be both highly improbable and highly informative. It is telling you something you wouldn't otherwise have guessed. But if this claim refers to weather in Seattle during the spring when the chance of rain is very high, then it will be both probable and relatively uninformative. It's telling you something you could easily have guessed. The mathematical theory of information models this feature of our ordinary understanding of information, making high probability claims have low information content and low probability claims have high information content. Given this characterization of how high and low information in terms of probability with this characterization, there's no reason to confine the mathematical theory of information to character strings. Indeed, any reference class of possibilities over which there is a probability distribution is fair game for this mathematical theory. For information to be generated, therefore, means identifying one possibility and ruling out the rest. The more possibilities get ruled out, and correspondingly the more improbable the possibility that actually occurred, the greater the information generated. To rule out no possibilities is to assert a tautology and provide no information. It's raining or it's not raining is totally uninformative. On the other hand, it's raining is informative because it rules out it's not raining. Moreover, it is raining, it is informative to the degree that the claim is improbable. Now, to generate information is therefore to rule out possibilities. Moreover, the amount of information generated here corresponds to the probability of that possibility or range of possibilities that were ruled out. But who or what rules out the possibilities? Now, this is where things get closer to this whole question of intelligent design. In practice, there are two sources of information: intelligent agency and physical processes. An intelligent agent may explicitly identify a pattern within the reference class of possibilities and thereby generate information. Alternatively, a physical process can produce an event represented as a possibility within the reference class of possibilities and thereby generate information. Let us refer to the former type of information as agent-induced or conceptual information, and to the latter as event-induced or physical information. Now, what happens when conceptual information and physical information coincide? Consider, for instance, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI, which looks for signs of intelligence in radio signals from outer space. What happens if, as a conceptual act, SETI researchers identify a sequence of prime numbers, and then, lo and behold, as in the movie Contact, nothing like this has happened in real-life SETI research, but if you go with Carl Sagan here, that very sequence is transmitted as a physical event to the radio telescopes that these SETI researchers are monitoring. As in the movie, they would conclude that extraterrestrial intelligence had established contact. Now, it's precisely such a coincidence of conceptual and physical information that constitutes complex specified information. Now, I'm speaking to you right now. I'm forming all sorts of words with my vocal cords. There are any number of things that could be coming out of my vocal cords. Most of the sounds that my vocal cords could generate would not be in any natural language at all. Many would be could be in a natural language that has yet been uninvented or has died. The sounds that are coming out are in English. They're appropriate to the context of this discussion on science and religion. So here you have an event. The environment is producing these sounds. I'm there. And you have patterns, background knowledge in your mind, where there's a conceptual grid and then there's a pattern match. And it's in that pattern match that you know that there's an intelligence communicating to you and that it's not just some robot or some device, that there's actually something going on out there. So this is how we do it. This is how we infer that intelligence is out there. It is in these coincidences of patterns that we bring to the table and patterns that the environment brings to us. And it's a basic part of human rationality. Did she fall or was she pushed? Was that an intentional act or was that an accident? Our language has a way of just carving up experience like this. Accident, randomness, chance, all these words that we use to describe things, noise versus structure, pattern, intention, purpose, design. It's not accidental. And I would say as a Christian that this reflects something fundamental about nature of reality, and that in fact design and a designing God is fundamental to reality. So anyway, but that's, so this is not, it's not just that I'm pulling this out of the hat saying complex specified information is a marker of intelligence. And we use it all the time. And I outline that in my book, The Design Inference, and I've done that also in subsequent writings. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because we're running out of time, and also I do want to have a few digressions here, and I want to also leave a little bit of time for Q&A. So let me skip ahead and then really speak to this, how this is all then relating, how information theory then actually becomes a way of cashing out intelligent design. Remember about 3 years ago, I had a debate with Michael Shermer, and it seems like the people I just on a roadshow debating. Michael Ruse is another one. We've had about 6 debates. It suddenly struck me, even though I've debated them so often, that intelligent design, it was like, this is just, it can't be science because it's just something spooky. You've got, there's just this designer who's just kind of getting in there, messing with the natural laws, violating the principles by which nature operates, does it in a way that perhaps we can't see, can't get any rational hold on, disappears. And what do you have left then? If all intelligent design is saying designer did it, we know that natural causes didn't have the ability, that it seems would not be grist for a robust scientific theory. But so it struck me that, and I've been thinking in these terms for a long time, in terms of cashing out intelligent design in terms of information. And when you do that, information theory is a well-accepted theory in the sciences already. And so what would that look like? And so developing that further. So now what I've argued is that complex specified information, this form of information, then is a reliable marker of intelligence. Now, where the pushback comes on the part of Darwinists, they want to say, well, no, the Darwinian mechanism of natural selection acting on random variations is another way of generating this form of information that you design people are saying points to intelligence. So they disagree. Darwinian naturalists, for instance, accept that biological systems exhibit complex specified information. Okay, and let me digress here for a moment because when you have a debate that's as sharp as this, often there's a question of, well, are we going to even adopt your vocabulary? Because we're going to say complex specified information. Right? We're going on your terms, you design people, and we don't want to do that. And so some of the critics will say, well, this isn't even a proper notion at all. But the thing is, I actually got my inspiration for complex specified information from Richard Dawkins, who says what makes biology special is that it's complex and it's specified. And you can go back further, read the work of Francis Crick, and complex and specified ends up in the same sentence. And the very notion of specified complexity, which is another way of describing it, was first coined by Leslie Orgel, an Origin of Life researcher. So this notion is out there, it has currency, and so go with me. Biologists do admit that it's there, but then they say, no, it's natural selection that produces it. Rather, they contend that it results from a non-teleological process or mechanism, typically the Darwinian mechanism of natural selection acting on random variations. In effect, the Darwinian naturalist claims that nature is capable of generating complex specified information apart from intelligence. To see that nature has no such capacity, we need to understand the concept of displacement as it applies to information generally and complex specified information in particular. And so this is really what I want to end with, this notion of displacement. And let me just say, this notion of displacement, it fits into this whole literature of no free lunch theorems, now emerging literature and conservation of information, which these are results that some colleagues of mine and I have been publishing in the peer-reviewed mathematical and engineering literature. So it's not just that this is this magic word that we're just putting on and see that solves all our problems. There's real scientific content that gets cashed out in a precise mathematical way. So this displacement, as it applies to information theory generally and complex specified information in particular. Basic idea of displacement is this: suppose you need to search a space of possibilities. Okay? And this is why intelligent design keeps coming up, because these search spaces in biology are typically enormous. Okay? And you're finding a needle in the haystack. Not always. In fact, I think with Ken Miller, he's very good at cherry picking and finding systems that he will say have evolved just by natural selection, but often the information output that's there is very minimal. For instance, he didn't mention nylonase. This is an enzyme that has evolved to where bacteria can chew up nylon. Nylon hasn't existed forever. Okay? And bacteria have existed a long time more than nylon. Nylon's only been around since the 1930s or so. But the genetic change to bring about the nylonase, last I looked at it, was just there was basically a frame shift, and then lo and behold, you had this enzyme. Now it's remarkable. I wonder what is nature like? Is there some? But the thing is, that sort of information input is very minimal. Okay? It's just a frame shift there. So and so I'd like to, when he says we've for instance, got a whole new metabolic pathway. We're now able to get citrates, get that metabolized. I'd like to see what the actual genetic changes are, how much information is he actually attributing to natural selection. But maybe we'll have time to talk about that. Anyway, but the basic idea with displacement then is, suppose you need to search a space of possibilities. It is so large that the possibilities individually are so improbable that an exhaustive search is not feasible, and a random search is highly unlikely to conclude the search successfully. In consequence, you need some constraints on the search, some information to help guide the search to a solution. Think of an Easter egg hunt, where one provides hints or guidance versus those where you don't. Okay, so you think of it warmer as opposed to just randomly searching. All such information that assists the search, however, resides in a search space of its own. See, let me try to make this clearer. Somebody like Richard Dawkins will come to you and say, look, purely random processes aren't able to do it. But natural selection acting on random variations is quintessentially non-random. Let's say that word, quintessential. It's non-random. And so now you've got a search that actually does find these things in biological configuration of the space. Some people don't like search. Okay? They think it's that somehow some evolutionists challenge that. But if you look at evolutionary search, it's widely used in the literature. So what he does is, in a sense, he hands you an evolutionary search that does the job much better than blind search. And I would say, yes, it does. But why does it succeed? Okay, that's the question you need to ask yourself. It's as though once I hand you a Darwinian process that works, the problem is solved, right? Darwin did it all. But why does that Darwinian process work? Because there are lots of ways of configuring an evolutionary landscape where it's not going to work. There's not going to be any successful search conducted. Okay, so we'll get to that. So all such information that assists your search, however, resides in a search space of its own, an informational search. So the search of the original space gets displaced to a search of an informational space in which the crucial information for successfully searching the original space resides. It becomes a search for the search. Now, it is a mathematical fact that such a higher order search is always at least as big and at least as hard as the search of the original space. This is what I call the displacement problem. And there's now a significant body of peer-reviewed literature on that. Now think of the displacement problem this way. Imagine an island with buried treasure. You can scour the island trying to find buried treasure. Alternatively, you can try to find a map that tells you where the treasure is buried. Once such a map is in hand, finding the treasure is no problem. But how to find such a map? For every place on the map, there's a place For every place on the island, there is a map with an X marking where the treasure could be located. There are also maps with directions such as turn here, then walk 10 paces, then start to dig. The vast majority of such maps will be misleading and provide no help in locating the treasure. Indeed, a map that accurately informs us where the treasure is will be mixed among a huge assortment of misleading maps. That's the clutter problem that we deal with, and especially I think we're sensitive to it in the information age. The huge assortment of maps is the informational space associated with the original search. Finding the right map within the huge assortment is no easier than simply finding the treasure directly. And in fact, the mathematics tells us that in many instances it will be orders of magnitude more difficult. I hope you get this, okay? Here's a map. Okay, now the problem is solved, right? We can find the treasure. Okay, where'd you get the map? Okay, that's the problem. Okay, so here's evolution. It does the job. Okay, well, but how does evolution know to do it? I mean, when you program evolution on computers, you have to fine-tune the fitness landscape to solve the problem you have to. I mean, evolutionary computing is a big field. One of my colleagues at Baylor is one of the inventors of this field of computational intelligence, which includes neural networks, evolutionary computing, and fuzzy sets. That's the field. Okay? So evolutionary computing is useful, but what makes it useful is that it only becomes useful when you use your knowledge to set up a fitness landscape which finds then the solution to the problem you're after. That's how it works. So it's a design process. Okay. Let me let it just skip. Okay. Thus, in general, when natural systems exhibit intelligence by producing complex specified information, they have not in fact created it from scratch, but merely shuffled around existing information. Nature is a matrix for expressing already existing information. Displacement suggests that the ultimate source of that information resides in an intelligence not reducible to nature. Though not denying Darwinian evolution or even limiting its role as an immediate efficient cause in the history of life, displacement reveals that Darwinian evolution is deeply teleological. That's controversial, but that's where I think the best scientific information theoretic argumentation and evidence is going. Richard Dawkins, when he touts the wonder-working powers of natural selection, is right in saying that natural selection can search biological configuration space much more efficiently than blind search, but natural selection by itself has no inherent property to conduct such a search successfully unless it is properly programmed with the right fitness landscape. To say that the environment provides the right fitness, which is what Ken Miller said, merely sidesteps the challenge here. How did the environment know? Or as complexity theorist Stu Kaufman, I've debated Stu on a number of occasions. Stu is not a friend of intelligent design, but he realizes the problem, as I think many Darwinists do not, puts it, quote, if mutation, recombination, and selection only works well on certain kinds of fitness landscapes, yet most organisms are sexual and hence use recombination, and all organisms use mutation as a search mechanism. Well, this is search. Okay, so he admits that this is the right idea. Where did these well-wrought fitness landscapes come from, such that evolution manages to produce the fancy stuff all around us? Close quote. What's Kaufman's answer? No one knows. It's also a quote. Okay. So where do you get? How is it that evolution works? I mean, you can set up. I can set up computer programs where we set up some evolutionary scenario, and it goes nowhere. Okay? And in fact, when you look at some of the key programs that are out there, which are supposed to, which get used, Richard Dembski, I'm not nearly as impressed with those 20, 30,000 generations of E. coli that he ran at Michigan State. I didn't think there was all that much of interest that came out of it. But when he runs a computer simulation, only 850 generations, he gets all this nifty stuff. Well, why? Because he's programmed it to produce the nifty stuff. And this is actually a lot of what we have done in this evolutionary informatics lab at Baylor. I'll say it's at Baylor because the people there at Baylor. The lab itself has been kicked off the Baylor server. If you want the other side to, Judgment Day, watch Expelled with Ben Stein, and then you can see how my fellow design theorists regularly get shafted by the Darwinian establishment. But that work is being done, and what we've done is gone through the various programs, Tierra, Tom Schneider's EV, the Evita program of Richard Dembski, and there are others, and show where they are cooking the books. You know, it's easy to get computer programs to evolve interesting stuff, but when they do it, it's because they've been intelligently programmed. It's not that we've gotten anything for free or from scratch. It's been because the information has been smuggled in, and who or what has smuggled it in? It's been an intelligence. Okay, just to be clear what I'm saying here, and what I'm not saying. I'm not here challenging common descent, the claim that all organisms trace their lineage to a universal common ancestor. Nor am I challenging evolutionary gradualism, that organisms have evolved gradually over time. Nor am I even challenging that natural selection may be the principal mechanism by which organisms have evolved. Rather, I'm challenging the claim that evolution can create complex specified information from scratch where previously it did not exist. It follows that natural selection, even if it is the mechanism by which organisms evolve, achieves its successes by incorporating and using existing information which it did not generate but borrowed from elsewhere. This is displacement. And I'm running out of time. Yeah, because I was finally addressing the who designed the designer question. You can take that up in the Q&A if you like. So let me close with this. Who then is the designer? As a Christian, I hold that the Christian God is the ultimate source of design behind the universe. Well, that leaves open that God works through secondary causes, including derived intelligences such as angels or teleological processes. But there's no way for design inferences based on features of the natural world to reach that conclusion. Design inferred from complex specified information in nature is compatible with Christian belief, but does not entail it. This is as it should be. Nature is silent about the revelation of Christ in Scripture and salvation history generally. At the same time, nothing prevents nature from independently testifying to the God revealed in Scripture. Complex specified information exhibited in natural phenomena is perhaps best thought of as God's fingerprints. Fingerprints, and there's a whole even medieval intellectual tradition on vestigia, the footprints, but I'll go with fingerprints. Fingerprints never tell us the character of the one whose fingers are in question. And they can tell us that we are dealing with an intelligence. And this, in turn, can lead us to inquire into the character of that intelligence. Okay? Really, the nub in this discussion is scientific detectability and evidence. Is there evidence for these fingerprints there? And what I'm saying is that information theory helps us to get there. People on the other side of this want to say, no, it's not scientifically detectable. An information-theoretic design argument, therefore, removes us from the paths of atheistic materialism that lead away from God and takes us a modest distance toward an intelligence behind nature who, from the vantage of Christian theology, can be no other than God. In this way, information theory approves of God's existence. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions?
Bill and Ken, thanks so much, and both of you guys, the intelligence is phenomenal, but I'm thrilled to see that you both have come here to the Abbey to have this debate and that ideas really matter. It's really exciting. My question is, this debate between nature and design is key, and you guys have thought about it a ton, and there's tons of passion. But if we were just debating whether molecules attract each other or repel each other, we would all be asleep. The reason why this counts is because the idea of evolution has been used to say that metaphysical truth does not exist and that God is dead. Now, obviously, you're both Christians, and you both, I think, agree with some of the ending of your talk, where you said that God is the creator of this, just at what point. How, for us in 2012 that are not scientists, can you move a little bit from this debate and say, how do we get to this point where a scientific theory suddenly is being used to say God is dead?
Well, I don't think there's any straight logic that takes you there. You look at the world, and yet, I think as a sociological phenomenon, it happens that people, I don't know how many people have described their loss of faith in terms of being exposed to evolutionary theory or to origin of life experiments. And one friend of mine in high school learned the Miller-Urey experiment and said, oh, life can assemble itself, no need for God, therefore I'm now an atheist. Now, granted, it's not very metaphysically sophisticated, yet that's the chain of reasoning. And then you have people like Richard Dawkins, also not very metaphysically sophisticated. I think he even said recently that he doesn't understand the word epistemology or something close to that, doesn't care about it. But he's there, and other atheists egging them on. So I think that's right. Look, I don't need intelligent design to believe in God. I mean, I'm a mathematician, right? So I'm a Platonic realist about mathematical entities. I think it's just incredible that we can cook up mathematics, in our little cubbyhole, and then it corresponds to what we find in nature. I mean, people invent quaternions, and the mathematician does that in the 19th century. 20th century, Paul Dirac has to reinvent them because he has to solve a relativistic quantum equation, and then he discovers in the process also that there are things like positrons, which then get confirmed a few years later. I mean, I think that's just remarkable. I mean, this sort of Eugene Wigner line, the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. I mean, for me, that's enough. And then arguments for beauty. That's fine. I think Peter Kreeft has 40 arguments for the existence of God, and one of them is Bach. That's it. So I think we've got plenty of good reasons for believing in God. For me, this is ultimately a scientific question. I mean, as I said, evolution is a theory of process. What is required? If you've got a theory of process, you need resources to get from point A to point B. What are adequate resources to do it? It seems to me that's a perfectly legitimate question. It's perfectly legitimate to ask whether intelligence is required, whether information in this sense is required. And we live in an information age, and information is something that cannot be simply reduced to matter. It seems that is something that we are now finding out. And I think it's weighing much more heavily on thinkers these days than even 20 years ago. I have a big fat encyclopedia of physics on my shelf, and nowhere in that book, in the main entries or in the extensive index, was the word information appeared. Now, Santa Fe Institute and others, I mean, there's been a whole big explosion of interest in just this concept of information. What is the information processing power of the universe? The quantum computational theorist Seth Lloyd at MIT puts it at 10 to the 120th power. That's basically the amount of computational steps that the universe can do. And these are interesting results. I mean, so I think we're much more sensitized to the role of information, and then where's that information coming from? I think from the evolutionary perspective, the move is always from simplicity to complexity. You've got to, it's not of interest to explain why you've got cavefish that have nubs for eyes. Well, use it or lose it. I mean, that's going to happen. How do you get those eyes in the first place? That's what has to be explained. And from an evolutionary perspective, all it happened from organisms that didn't have those eyes. Now, did that happen by purely material process? Or was there some sort of infusion of information needed to create those eyes originally? And what the mathematics suggests is that when you're dealing with information, unless it's being generated by an intelligence, the information problem always intensifies as you go back. It doesn't diminish. The evolutionist wants to say it diminishes. You can always have less and less because when you go back far enough, and the simplest organism is much simpler genomically and otherwise than us. So is it that you can go back? As you go back in time, you get things that are simpler and simpler. And purely material processes can generate these increasing levels of complex information, or does the problem intensify? And in fact, the mathematics suggests that the problem intensifies. So, if you're trying to explain this complex specified information, you've got a hole to fill. For the evolutionist, you can dig another hole, and that other hole is not as deep as the hole you're filling. And then eventually you can go back far enough and there are no holes at all. Mathematics suggests that when you fill it, the hole you've just dug to fill the existing hole is actually at least as deep. Okay, and that's, I'm using an analogy, but that's what the mathematics is. And the thing is, we have a whole bunch of results in that vein. I mean, they started with some no free lunch theorems back in the mid-90s, which are very surprising and disconcerting, I think, to the mathematical community and the biological community, those who with enough mathematical background to consider it. And the results since then have only confirmed
Frankie and Mrs. Valenzuela over there.
Thank you. Sorry, that's loud. I'm wrestling with a question that maybe you can help me pinpoint a little bit more. The word information may have a very specific way that you're using it mathematically. To the layman, information implies communication, which necessarily entails a sender and a receiver. When we're talking about intelligences, in your examples of, communicating a message that's encrypted or something like that, we're communicating between two human intelligences. We know that. Is there a way in which the fact that you're calling this information theoretics, okay, necessarily implies a prior conclusion that there is a sender, that we as receivers are looking for that sender? In a way, we're a priori saying that there is something to be looking for there. I'm not saying that I would disagree with that at all, but is there a way in which the debate is hindered by that presupposition? And how might you hash that out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, when you look at Shannon and Weaver's 1940s text on information theory, I mean, that's the classic diagram of sender to receiver. So that's their model of communication. But as I said in the paper, the real core notion of information is ruling out possibilities. And for that, you don't need to be thinking in terms of a communication channel. You have a reference class of possibilities and then you restrict it. Whenever that happens, and so I guess you can think of it almost as a Aristotelian potentiality and then actualization. Okay, and that's when information happens. It's happening right now as I'm speaking to you because there's this whole range of things, and I could be just talking gobbledygook, but instead it's appropriate English communication, contextually appropriate to our conversation. So there's been this constraining of possibilities, ruling out of possibilities, and then actualizing a much more restricted subset. And when that happens, information happens. So that's all that I'm presupposing. Now, where it gets interesting is that when you start looking at the patterns, when you see this ruling out of possibilities, the patterns that emerge from that. And, some patterns will point to intelligence, others won't. I mean, if I have a coin, I start flipping it 1,000 times, most likely no pattern there that's going to be discernible. It's going to look, call it random. What do we mean by random? I mean, one thing we mean by random is that there's no salient pattern, nothing that we can make sense of. What if I flip that coin and it comes out, you break it into 8-bit blocks, and you treat it as ASCII code, and then it's a coin that's communicating with me, saying, hi, well, what do you want to know? I know a cure for cancer, and I keep flipping, and I get a cure for cancer. That would be a magic penny. Now, the thing is, if you were to witness that, it's a thought experiment, right? I mean, but even if your best physical theory was saying, oh, this is just physical mechanism producing that, I don't have any knowledge of cancer and cures of cancer, so some intelligence is guiding that, and we would draw that implication. I mean, just as we would if we got a signal of prime numbers, as in the movie Contact. We concluded there was an intelligence. We'd contact the New York Times Science Editor and say, hey, here we are. But nothing like that has happened. And by the way, the real life study program doesn't look for prime numbers. They look for narrow bandwidth radio transmission, which are characteristic of those on the planet Earth. But even that is diagnostic of intelligence as far as the SETI researchers, and they haven't found anything compelling there either. But that's when information happens. It's when you have this reduction of possibilities. There are other things I could have brought up here. I mean, it's G.K. Chesterton has some wonderful things to say about this, where he says that really any type of intelligence, I mean, it involves a ruling out, but then also commitment. I mean, God, one conundrum which has been raised to theists is, does God need the universe? Is God plus the universe more than God? And if God plus the universe is more than God, then how is God self-sufficient? And how is God perfect? Well, the thing is, God plus the universe is actually less than God, because God by himself, because the universe, there are all these possibilities there, and God created this world, gifted this world, loved this world, committed himself to this world. And in doing that, he ruled out all these others. does not actualize. By the way, I'm not a multi-worlds quantum realist on this. So I don't think it makes theological sense. I mean, scientifically, it is really can't decide one or the other. But and I think we do this in all sorts of areas of life. And G.K. Chesterton, in that very discussion, orthodoxy will say, is what you do also when you get married. You commit to one, and you rule out all the others. But there's a richness that comes in once you do rule out. It's only by ruling out, and also within certain constraints. And anyway, we go on about that, but that's, yeah.
Tim Seeley, still have a question?
I did. Actually, thank you, Bill. I'm trying to make sure that I understand. So I'm going to say 3 statements, and I hope at the end you'll say, yes, that's it. You need to try to clarify now, or I'll track you down. So the first is, evolution is a design process. The second is, the source of the success of that system is outside the system. The third is, natural selection on random genetic variation achieves its success by using information it did not produce.
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, I want to nuance it a little bit. So I would say evolution doesn't have to be a design process, because it may just, you may just have an arbitrary fitness landscape and nothing, it's just bumbling along. But if it's producing things in biological configurations, if you're producing things like a novel protein that does something completely new and that requires a good deal of information, I'd say, yeah, that's there. You've got that information that to be is being utilized by that process, and so it's a teleological process. So I would say yes. Insofar as Darwinian evolution or evolutionary processes are producing interesting things, you can use interesting things loosely, but we can make that more precise. I'd say it's a design. There's design. It's operating with it. Okay. Now, does that information have to be fed in from outside? That gets a little trickier, because what these information-theoretic results are saying is basically you can keep deferring the problem back. Okay, so there's a sense in which all the information may be front-loaded into the universe, and God never has to get in there to actually, or designer never has to get into it to put the information there. So it could just be in the environment, but even if it was in the environment from the beginning, it seems that it could still, these results are then still asking, well, then you ask, well, how did it get there at the moment of creation? So there's a sense in which these arguments, they always push you, if the information problem never goes away, if you backtrack the information, you can think of it in accounting terms. It's in a sense, just as we keep accountants track financial books to keep people on Wall Street honest, in a sense I'm seeing myself in the role of keeping biologists honest. And seeing, because I think there are a lot of inflated claims made for evolutionary theory. So is that, but if the problem, if there's never a diminution of the information as you go back, then then I think you have a regress, and then you have to ask, well, at the moment of creation, or the moment that the universe comes into existence, how did that information get there? So it's, well, remind me of the third, because I'm.
Natural selection of random genetic variation has to use information it did not produce to be successful.
Yeah, I would say that's right. Now, let me say this. I mean, for the purposes of this talk, arguendo, I've said, I'm fine with universal common ancestry. Personally, I don't buy it. I mean, a lot of people in the ID movement do, but a lot maybe overstated, but certain key figures certainly do. But I think the evidence for universal common ancestry is I'm not persuaded. Ken Miller, I think I'm fine to go with him on the sorts of examples that he gave. But the one which he left out was the Cambrian explosion, where you have all these basic animal body plans that suddenly emerge in the fossil record with no precursors. We can argue that, but it's, I think that there's a real discontinuity there. So I think there are further lines of evidence that I can take for intelligent design. But again, for me, this is a scientific question. if intelligent design were indeed to collapse, I would still be a Christian because my faith isn't based on it. And I think there are, and if I need good rational arguments, mathematics, argument from beauty, consciousness, moral argument, this moral argument is persuasive, and all sorts of arguments you can come up with in addition. So it's not like I need this, I'm desperately clinging to faith and intelligent design is it, and if I don't, then, I'm joining the spiritual doctrines, rational is friendly. So, thank you.